every human needs to feel that creative energy in their lives. For me, it's programming. I asked GPT-3 to write a Valentine's poem to my girlfriend, and it wrote a beautiful poem, you know? Like, I don't care if it's just predicting the next character. That's that's incredible.
Mission
that's
accomplished.
Incredible.
It works.
Yeah. So I think that would be one of my learnings, is replace myself sooner, and be hyper objective about it.
All right, so Alex, first things first, we have a great background here for you, so you got to explain this. Where are you? What's happening?
So I'm in the Grenadines right now, and I'm on a boat that I built, and we're actually speaking over Starlink, and it's working fantastically, or at least cross fingers. And I am here. This is where I live, pretty much. I sold all my things. I got this boat, and I live on the boat, and I do all my programming and working from here.
How long have you been living on the boat?
I have been living off and on since when I bought the boat, which was in December of 2021, and then I sailed it across Atlantic from Cape Town to Grenada. And then that took a month, and then I kind of sailed up in the Caribbean, and then I have been living off and on the boat. Boat life is amazing, but it's also tough to keep relationships and see friends and that kind of thing, especially if they live not on the boat with you.
So how did this all come about? Like, where did the idea to, kind of sell out of your things, live on a boat, where did this come from? Has it been like a childhood dream, or something else come up?
Well, I grew up sailing, and I love sailing. So that's key thing, because sailing is not for everyone. But for some people, the sea really calls too, and I'm one of those people. It was kind of programmed in me from a young age. And then during COVID, I guess I had a bit of a, like we all did, a bit of a shake-up. What's important in your life? How do you want to spend the rest of your life? And do you want to spend it all working in an office in San Francisco? Or do you want to explore the world? And there's obviously lots of pros and cons to whatever decision you make. It's very specific to the individual. But for me, I really wanted to explore and go on adventures, and sailing is one of the biggest adventures there is today.
So a lot of people left San Francisco around that time, but went to Austin, went to Miami, went to Montana. I didn't hear a lot of people sort of moving to the middle of the Atlantic. So you're definitely the first on that front.
Yeah.
Did you always know that you were going to try to build a company from the boat and work from the boat, or did that come along later?
This came along at the same idea. I was kind of forming this crazy plan to get the boat. Starlink has been in the works for a few years, and that actually had a huge influence on my plans, because I realized, the biggest thing I need is connectivity. And it's spotty in the Caribbean, and it's spotty around the world. But I knew that Starlink was coming. And, while the Starlink wasn't available when the boat was being built, I knew it was only like a year or two out. And now it's here. I have it. It's amazing. It is one of the best things I've ever bought in my entire life. It is just, I cannot get over the fact that we're speaking through like a satellite connection right now. And so... yeah, that really influenced the decision as well, knowing that I could work from anywhere and have good connectivity, and be remote. And the other thing is, my company is completely asynchronous, the way we designed it. So we have 3 other people in the company, and they one's in Slovakia, one's in China, and one's in the US. And so we have time zone hell, so we don't even try and coordinate time zones. We just don't have meetings. It can get lonely, so we'll chat to each other. We actually have a WhatsApp group to communicate, collaborate, and then we call each other every now and again. But generally, it's all asynchronous, and that is also key to living this life.
So Starlink, dumb question. Like, how do you even like sign up for Starlink? Do you just go to the website and like sign up, or is there like something you have to do special?
Yep, that's it. Your website, sign up. They will send you a dish. The dish has no buttons or any configuration. You just plug it in, and it orientates itself. It's a multi-phased array, so it doesn't need a gimbal, which is quite important for moving vehicles. It just needs a view of the sky, and it just works. You get 150 megabits down, and you have practically unlimited internet and no really restrictions. And it's honestly changed my life. It's only been possible because these satellites are in low Earth orbit, and that has only been possible because it's very cheap to put them there now because of all the other stuff that SpaceX is doing. But it is, I think this technology is going to change the world.
Now, does it work everywhere?
So, no. At some point, they're going to take these satellites and they're going to link them together with lasers. But until that point happens, the satellites communicate with the ground station.
So you went full asynchronous with Reflect for necessity reasons. What are the benefits of going full async, and then what are some of the drawbacks of going full async?
Yeah. Okay. So the benefits are no Zoom calls. I cannot stand Zoom calls, and I've actually had some deep thoughts about whether I'm gonna limit my life like this, because it honestly probably limits your career options and all sorts of things in your life by eliminating Zoom calls. But for now, that's what I've decided. So I went from back-to-back calls, every single hour in my last job, to no scheduled calls aside from the odd podcast.
Is it as amazing as I expect it is?
It's amazing. It is.
Does it get old? Do you ever miss Zoom?
I don't miss it at all.
It hasn't happened once.
I don't miss it one bit. And when someone generally tries to, schedule something with me, usually I'll put a lot of blockers up. I will tell them to send me an email or just chat to me on Discord or what, why do we need a call? But if we do need a call, then I try and keep that asynchronous as well. So I'm just like, call me on this day. Just try me a few times. And maybe that is a slightly obnoxious thing to do, but it is something that I've decided to do, and it's working well for me. So that's definitely one of the advantages. The disadvantages, man, if I was to build a proper venture back startup that was scaling really quickly, I would move to Austin right now and do that in person. I think I don't believe in remote for companies, for big companies, and I know that's going to anger lots of people. And maybe it's just a personal thing as well. I tend to find that I get a lot more enjoyment when I'm in person, working with a team in an office, and I've got a little commute that I cycle along, and then I got that kind of break between work and personal life. I love all of that, and I sometimes miss it, and so there is definitely drawbacks. But for now, at this point in my life, I've decided I'm not going to work on a venture-backed company. I'm going to try and keep something small, and do the whole async lifestyle business thing. And so far, I'm loving it.
So you said, doing remote or not doing remote, and sort of if you're going to build a company, sort of going into the office, that's very much your preference. But you also kind of said that you don't really think it works or scales, kind of if you're trying to build the next big thing. Why is that? What have you seen there in terms of where remote breaks down?
I don't think humans trust each other unless they meet in person. We have semi-advanced monkey brains. There's something about breaking bread with people, eating with people that changes something in the psyche, and it makes you trust people. It bonds people, and that is something that's missing for a remote. And to their credit, remote first companies understand this. If you look at the culture of some of them, like GitLab, it's a very analytical culture. Everything is process driven. There's a checklist for everything. And that's the kind of thing you have to do with those companies. And they tell their employees, hey, you want social life? You want camaraderie? Go and get some friends. Don't look for that at work. You're not gonna get that here. That's and that's fine as well. But it's just not, I guess, my cup of tea. I think So I love working in person if we are trying to build something massive together. But for something like a lifestyle business, that absolutely can be completely asynchronous and remote, and I love it. But maybe there are people. Well, for sure there are people that are a lot better at me at managing remote teams, and I'm sure they think differently.
Now, you said if you were doing it, kind of the venture-backed route, you would build a team, you'd build a company in Austin. Why Austin these days?
Man, don't want to get canceled. I just love Austin. I think it is.
It's all for the barbecue.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the only reason.
It reminds me a lot of early SF. It's small. It's like semi-boring, which is quite important for getting good work done. It's not like New York, where it's like it's something that's going on every second. It's got a really great community. I've got a lot of friends there. I also think it's got a really good work ethic, and that is important. There's no getting around it. Hard work is how you get successful outcomes, and I'm just amazed that we've somehow deviated away from that philosophy in the zeitgeist, maybe at least. But that is what I believe, and so I would probably go to Austin.
So going back to Clearbit, so what were, great journey, many years, I'm sure there's, this could be like a multi-hour long, conversation over dinner, but biggest takeaways, lessons learned kind of from, your first company with Clearbit.
Oh, that's a big question. I ran Clearbit for 6 years, and during those years I scaled the company up to I think about 150 people, and now it's roughly 180 people. So I scaled up the company, and I really transformed as a person. I spent the majority of my formative years of my 20s building that company, and so I really changed a lot, and I learned a lot about different things in the business. I'm a programmer. I'm a very technical person. That's my background, and I love building product. So it was really interesting to learn about go-to-market and marketing and how to run a big sales team and do operations and do really good finances and hire a CFO. And my God, there's just so much to learn. It's fascinating. But one of the things I wish I'd done earlier, quite frankly, was replace myself earlier. I ended up replacing myself, like I said, about 6 years in, and we found an amazing CEO. This chap called Ross, who came from SurveyMonkey, and he had a lot more experience than me around running bigger companies. And what I realized at the time was that people are good at different things, and there's no ego in it, And Ross will be the first to tell you that he cannot found a company. He's not going to start a company. But I would also be the first to tell you that I'm not the guy to run a massive company. I don't particularly enjoy it. So I think that would be one of my learnings. is replace myself sooner, and be like just, I guess, hyper objective about it.
Yeah, and obviously there are plenty of founders that kind of go all the way and still running their big public company today. There's folks that replace themselves kind of somewhere along the journey, maybe similar point to you, earlier point to you, later point to you. Like there is no right answer, but is it just sort of a personal preference thing of like, do you want to do this, or is there something else that, like, if a founder is listening right now and is like, oh, should I replace myself? Like, what's the rubric you use to make that decision?
There's this framework that I stole called the Zone of Genius, and there's various different zones. I won't go into the full thing. You can find it on my blog if you're curious. But there's zone of excellence, and then there's a zone of genius. And the zone of excellence is something that you are very good at, but it doesn't give you energy. And there is a zone of genius, which is something that you are very good at, almost exceptionally good at, and it does give you energy. And by giving energy, what I mean is like the hours just go by. It's like, for example, when I'm engineering, when I'm coding, I can just plug away and then look and oh, it's dark, and it just everything fades away. And so if you find that with business, then by all means, continue running a business. But what a lot of people find is that and this is not just with CEOs, this happens everywhere, especially with lawyers. They're people that find that they're really good at legal stuff, and they thought it was going to be a really safe, good career, but they end up hating their lives. And this is not all lawyers by any means. Some I know that absolutely love being lawyers, but I know a lot that hate it. And I think it's because of this trap where they get trapped in the zone of excellence, where they're like, oh, I'm good at that, so I should do that. And I think it should be, I'm good at that, and it gives me energy, therefore I should do that.
Now, there's always going to be things that, maybe are in the zone of excellence or the zone of shittiness, where it's just like you have to do it.
Yeah.
So, like, it's not like you can't have the perfect life where it's like 100% zone of genius. There's always going to be like a little bit of that, yin and yang balance, right?
Yeah, there is. And I actually really enjoy, fortunately for me, really enjoy the schlep work with the early stage companies. So I love like going on Atlas and registering a new LLC and setting all that up, and like setting up the Stripe account and wiring up the marketing and the analytics, and I like being one of those one-man bands that can do all of that stuff. But for like accounting, finances, no way I'm going to do that stuff. I am going to hire someone to do that. And then at Clearbit, when we were about 20 people, I started looking around for a COO. And actually, this is a really good learning. Hire a COO, or even better, hire a CFO way earlier than you think. I would say 30 employees. Try and hire a CFO. Maybe hire a head of ops to get to that point. But after that, get that CFO. They will transform your life. It'll make it so much better. You can actually have someone competent to ask some of these big questions, like when should we raise money? How much should we raise? Rather than going like this. So that's something that I'm not good at, that I hide for, and there's so many jobs like that in the company. Sales, marketing, again, I'm not good at. You just got to hire around yourself, and you got to be exceptionally good at finding the best people in the industry for those roles, and then also firing them when they are not performing, which is probably the hardest part, because you say to yourself, who am I to fire this industry veteran? I've got no experience. But if you want to build a massive venture scale company, then you have to keep pruning your exec team.
Back on this journey of realizing that you should have replaced yourself earlier, and kind of the rubric that you used and all that kind of stuff, I know something that you had done a lot of was, leaning into a relationship with a CEO coach.
Well, I was very, very fortunate in that I think that I found the best CEO coach in the world, and he is called Matt Mashari. And while he doesn't coach me anymore, he's definitely a mentor to me, and I chat with him very regularly. And I think the world of him. And he really showed me life didn't have to be quite as hard as I was making it out to be. We were about 25 people at the time, and things were starting to break down. Suddenly when you start to get to 50 people, everything breaks, and you have to put in systems. And Matt is a very clear, logical thinker, and he's also a empath. Do you remember these empaths from Star Trek that they could just completely read your emotions? Well, that's Matt as well. So, which is very unusual to have both of those abilities, and that makes him an amazing coach. So, one of my number one pieces of advice is go and find that coach for you, whoever it is, because it's just insanity to try and do this alone. No professional athlete would ever try and win Wimbledon without a coach. That would be nuts. So why do CEOs try and do it alone? It makes no sense. So one of the best parts about running a venture-backed company is that you have the resources to really invest in yourself. So I had a CEO coach, I had a therapist, I had a public speaking coach, and a trainer. And all of those people are basically there to make you the best leader possible, and the best performer possible. And I always say expense those things, because they are part of your performance as a CEO. And you've got to really look after yourself. You've got to really look after your mental health, because it sometimes is absolutely miserable, and you need to have that support network when those miserable times happen. Otherwise you're like, well, why am I spending my life doing something that's torturing me? And you need the systems and there's frameworks and there's people there to support you through that journey.
Now, you went through that whole journey. Clearbit was a company that scaled up, as you described. You did raise capital. You invested in all of the supporting resources, coach, therapist, trainer, public speaking coach, all of the things. You eventually hired, an executive team around you. So you did the whole thing. Now you're starting a different company, and you're not taking that path. So tell us about the path that you're taking and why you decided to sort of do it differently this time.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I really missed when I was running Clearbit was programming. The last maybe 4 years, hadn't programmed at all. And what I eventually understood about myself was programming was how I was creative. And I think every human needs to feel that creative energy in their lives. And we all feel it slightly differently. Some people feel it by managing a team, or by creating the perfect Excel spreadsheet. For me, it's programming. And what you will find is if you are not, scratching that creative itch, whatever it may be for you, that eventually you will get burnt out, which is kind of what happened to me. So that was number one. I was like, I have to run a business where I'm programming. And then I wanted to try something completely different. I wanted to try B2C. Part of it was because I wanted a small team. I wanted a lot of flexibility. And B2B is great. In fact, it's a lot easier than B2C to make money in B2B. In my opinion, a lot easier. But it does require a large team. The amount of money you make is fairly linearly scaled with your headcount, which is which from a programmer's perspective, it is very frustrating because you just by your natural inclination love optimizing, but that's the case of it. So I wanted to build a B2C company. I wanted a lot of flexibility. I wanted to travel, and I wanted to build something that I used every day, which is one of the other nice things about B2C is that that's possible. So for me, I love writing, so I decided to make yet another notes app, and it's called Reflect. And now we have a couple of thousand users, and it's growing, and it's lovely. And I make products for people like me as well. Like I make products Reflect for me, but also our customers. I love our customers, and I really connect with them. Quite frankly, in a way that I didn't with Clearbit's customers. And for me, that gives me a lot of extra energy to invest in the company. When you really love helping people, you really love the people that you're working with and your customers.
On some of the things you mentioned, B2C, you can have more leverage or sort of a smaller team. Why is that?
Well, you almost have to, because if your average contract value is, for Reflect, we charge like $120 a year, right? That is not enough to afford any sales rep to sell that, right? So you have no choice but to automate the entire sales process. Also, the barrier to entry is easier. Like, companies generally do a bit of due diligence before paying $20,000 for Clearbit. They'll do some tests and this and that, and they will probably require to speak to humans. We don't totally trust websites. We want to see if there's like a human behind the scenes operating it that we can trust. That's another major difference to B2C. It's like, okay, it's $10 to $15 a month. Like, sure, I'll give it a shot. I'll put it on my credit card and see if it works for me or not. It's got a free trial. I'll try that. So there's a lot of differences there. I would not say one is better than the other by any means. But what I have found out is that B2B is a hell of a lot easier to make money. To be totally transparent, in Clearbit's first year we made $1 million, and in Reflect's first year we made, I think, a couple of $100,000. So it is, it's significant.
And another thing that you're doing differently is you're not going the VC-backed route, and you said kind of building a self-described lifestyle business. Why are you choosing to go that path?
Well, so I don't have to talk to VCs. No, I'm kidding. I
don't blame you.
No, I think this is the future for small companies, from raising from your customers. That is the future. Like, right now, there are a lot of different companies that could be started, but that aren't started because people don't realize that this is a viable option, or they are started and they take VC money and it causes them to self-destruct because they are not like part of the venture model. Like, if you got to ask yourself, can your company IPO? And don't delude yourself as well. Like, are there any notes apps out there that have IPO'd? Don't delude yourself. And if the answer is no, don't raise venture capital because it is like a very addictive drug. It's not just addictive to you; it's very addictive to your employees. And if you incentivize them with options, then they're going to say, "Hey, Alex, when are we raising next? What's my markup? My roommate just made $1 million at Stripe. What are you doing again? Why are we spending time on working this idea?" And so you'll get pressure to grow, not from your investors typically. They don't have to, because your employees every day are pushing you to raise the next round and grow and bigger, and it makes sense because that's how they're incentivized. You know, they only make a lot of money if the company makes a lot of money, or the company's equity is worth a lot of money. You know, what I wanted to skip all of that, and I wanted to see if we could just bootstrap initially, and then this crowdfunding thing came along, and I was like, you know, this is actually really interesting because we can raise from our customers, who then get even more involved in the business and like feel some ownership there, and for them it's like I think it's like an expensive Kickstarter that may like they feel part of, you know. Like I send part of my investor updates, I really go into detail about like how we're building the business. Like they're very different from the updates I would send a venture capitalist, for example, because I know a lot of our investors have never invested in anything before. So they feel part of it, they feel ownership, they use the product every day, and then we're going to try and make them a return. And the way we're going to try and do that is by paying them a dividend, which is insane in the tech industry. People look at me really odd, like, why are you doing that? But I think it gets around this these bad incentives. You know, let's just say, for example, we even if we did a crowdfund, but we told everyone that we were going to try and take another round, and like they would get a markup on their equity, right? What that would mean eventually is that we would have to have some kind of exit. So we would have to get acquired or IPO. We're not going to IPO. It's a note-taking company. Okay, Notion in my mind is a company wiki that probably can IPO, but a note-taking company, I don't think can IPO. So, and then I don't want to get acquired because then we'd have to shut the business down because the acquire would eventually mess up the business, which is what happens everywhere, you know. So all these note-taking tools, they get acquired by Dropbox and shut down. And I'm sick of having to change different tools, you know, because some founder decided to raise venture capital and eventually, a few years later down the line, had to sell the business. So there's those bad incentives, and then the other bad incentives is around the actual product features. So venture capital will change the actual features of the product, especially in a B2C company, where you are trying to decrease the cost of acquisition. Okay, so how do you decrease the cost of acquisition? Add team features. Okay, so that's why all these notes apps that take VC end up as wikis. Because you basically go where the money is, right? So if the money is saying build team features because you want some virality to the company and you want the company to grow really quickly, then you'll build those team features and the single player mode will suffer. There's the paradox with engineering is that there is no code faster than no code, and so the more features you add, the slower the app is. There's like no way of getting around that. And so if you're adding like all these company features and team features and different security things that like SOX compliance and all that jazz, your app's just going to get slower and slower and slower and slower. So that is a very long answer for why I wanted to avoid all of that and just build like an indie lifestyle company. And I just think we need more of these companies. There should be like, when I lived in New Zealand for a bit, and one of the frustrating things about New Zealand is there's no Amazon. It doesn't exist, and so you're like, well, where do I order stuff? And then you start finding this like little cottage industry of all these Shopify stores, like mom and pop stores, like 2 or 3 people. And sure, it's frustrating initially to find these stores, and maybe Shopify should maybe aggregate them or something. But ultimately, it's amazing because you start to build a relationship with these people, and they really care about the business because they have a lot of agency in their business. All the support is done by the owners of the business. Like it's kind of paradoxical that a company's best support is done in the first year when the founders are doing the support, but with these little cottage industry mom and pop shops, the founders keep doing the support. So I love all of that. I think we should bring that to tech companies. Let's have a cottage industry of little tech companies that just do one thing and do it well and do it beautifully.
Were there companies or founders that you had sort of looked at or talked to that kind of served as some inspiration, or was this kind of just like entirely first principles, like what do I want, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, that led you to this path?
Yeah, it's kind of sad that there's so few examples, but there's like a lot. There's some examples that I know about because I know the people involved, but they're not public about it. And there's, for example, a company I know that sells SVGs that makes $10 million a year, and the founder is extremely happy with that. It's like 5 people, and that was very inspiring, honestly. That you can just build something that works, it's simple, and scale it to $10 million a year. And I know another company that does $50 million a year. So it's like these companies are out there, but the incentive is not for the founders to talk about them if they are doing very well. So these founders are generally not very public about their successes. Now, Reflect, of course, is not doing anywhere near that amount of money. But I definitely had inspiration from a product perspective. I would say like there is this new class of internet apps that are just so beautiful. It's so great to use. And there's a lot of new technology that's just come around in the last couple of years that has made this possible. Things like Vercel, Next.js, TypeScript, just some of the new APIs in Chrome. It is amazing what you can do. And if I look at my doc right now, almost all of it is Electron. And some programmers hate this because it's kind of insane that every single app on here is shipping its own browser to my computer. It's not very efficient, but it is kind of amazing that these native apps, they masquerade as native apps, but they actually are web apps behind the scenes. A good example of this is texts.com. It's just an absolutely beautiful app that I use for messaging. So I definitely got inspired from a product perspective from some of these apps. But from a business model perspective, it's tough to find really good examples out there.
And maybe getting into Reflect a little bit, you've talked about it, but what outside of your passion for writing, kind of what made you say, all right, I want to build a note-taking app?
I love the technical challenge. It's funny, but building a notes app is one of the hardest things out there. It's kind of nuts that you think, like, what's complicated about it? It's like there's barely any UI, but when you add end-to-end encryption and real-time sync and like merge conflict and resolution and a WYSIWYG editor and all of that stuff, then it's a really interesting technical challenge. So I wanted to see if I could, was up to that challenge basically. And then, that was my initial motivations. It was like a tool I wanted to use every day. I wanted to write. I wanted to build an Electron app that was beautiful. That might sound like weird motivations, but those kind of all resulted in a notes app, and I think it's actually, I just got lucky that this note-taking tool, this extension of the mind, is actually, I think, is going to be like really fundamental to the future. I didn't anticipate that, but I think we just added GPT integration to our app, and it's awesome. And we also added Whisper integration, and it's awesome. And Whisper is this technology that OpenAI released and didn't get talked about much, but it is like human level transcription from audio. And now I can take all my notes verbally and just narrate them, and they're in there, and it's perfect. And sure, this has been available before. We've had narration, but now it's the fact that it's perfect means it's totally different. Like now it's actually usable. So I just been, I think, very fortunate that my initial motivations, weird and random as they were, have kind of resulted in this app where I get to play around with all the coolest tech right now. You know, all the stuff that's coming out, like SQLite, WASM, like all of this stuff. You know, and like we're exploring running models on the client and doing like spell and grammar correction in these models as well. So I have a lot more of these subsequent motivations that have come in, I think, just out of pure chance.
What are you doing with GPT in the app today?
So I think what GPT is good for is it's good in note-taking apps. It's good for reducing the amount of text. I don't think it's good for text generation. Typically, I think your notes should be a place where they are your notes, and you know, you haven't generated a bunch of crap in GPT. But I think it's really good for summarization. You probably heard of that the saying, you know, I didn't have enough time to write you a shorter letter, right? It's like summarization is such an important part of thinking, and GPT does it so well. You know, you can just in Reflect, you can just select some text and summarize it and pull out the key points, and especially if it's a recording from you know, as a narration, a whisper recording, you can summarize all your thoughts. So there's a lot there. In the future, who knows what will happen? You know, I do think these AI bots and so on, they will want context about you in order so you can ask it personal questions about your life. You know, where should I live? Like, I don't know, who should I date? It's crazy to think about it now, but maybe like this is possible in the future, and the AI will need to know some context about you. What better context is there than your notes, right? Now it's obviously.
Should I move to a boat in the middle of the Atlantic?
Yeah, exactly.
Am I the right kind of person for that? Tell me.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a very tricky problem because of security. And your notes are your most personal things in your entire life, your innermost thoughts, and that's why we have end-to-end encryption inside of Reflect. But you know, there's also a lot of power with this AI stuff. So we are also exploring like how much can we do without shipping your notes to OpenAI. Like, you know, how many of these models can we run on the client?
And I guess with everything that, you know, OpenAI is doing now, you know, on the LLM side or with Whisper or with like all the other stuff that they have going on, and then there's obviously, you know, others outside of OpenAI. Clearly there's lots of, you know, attention and excitement around it and sort of no shortage of tweets and press coverage. But to you as a programmer, like, what's different now? What's different about this?
Well, I don't think anyone expected that we would see these emergent properties just emerge out of big models. We are starting to see like chain of thought reasoning out of these big models, and it seems nuts that you know, we have something that's actually quite simple that we scale up and we get enough data, and now it starts to appear to be thinking. You know, and there's a lot of contention around this. You know, is it actually thinking? Does it actually have any understanding? But I kind of prefer, like, you know, a layman's approach looking at it and just saying, like, man, if it quacks like it's conscious, it is conscious, you know? And it's not, we're not at that point yet, but I don't think we're far off, you know? And, like, I don't think human creativity is much more than pattern matching and extrapolation. So the fact that all this program is doing is predicting the next token, you know, I don't think we can necessarily say that is it. You know, it's impossible to get creativity out of that. Well, we will see, but it is absolutely certain that it is possible to build a creative machine because we exist. You know, we are made of atoms. We can build a machine made of atoms that is creative because we are creative. Now, whether we're on the right road or not, we'll see. But it's looking really promising. It's like these emergent properties. You know, when I asked GPT-3 to write a Valentine's poem to my girlfriend, and it wrote a beautiful poem. You know, like I don't care if it's just predicting the next character. That's that's incredible.
Mission
that's
accomplished.
Incredible.
It works.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Oh god. You know, maybe shifting gears a little bit, like if you were, kind of giving advice to founders or like the next batch of YC companies right now, given where we are in the sort of landscape of startups and of venture capital and of like everything that's happening and kind of the macro being more bearish than it is bullish these days, like what guidance would you give to founders on sort of if they're like building now, starting now, like kind of a new company?
Oh yes, this is a great time to start a company. Start right now. Build a product. I personally don't think anyone should be raising money unless they have a product. And some people can't code. I think they should just learn to code. It's not that difficult. Like even if you're crap at coding, like create that initial product. You should be able to find some angels out there, and if you can't, find some customers. I think there's like no better time than to start a company like during a recession, because as you come out of this recession, then you can scale up. There's like loads of talent on the market, and it's less expensive to run a company, and now you have all this new automation as well. So I definitely do not let the recession kind of dissuade you from starting a company. I think there's other great reasons not to start a company, like are you any good at that? Do you like that? What's your mental health like? There's a lot of reasons not to start a company, and there's a lot of reasons too, but a recession, I think, shouldn't be one of those.
And like you said, there's also more than one path available, and that you're going down a path right now of sort of letting customers fund the business and taking more of sort of a bootstrap lifestyle approach. And kind of as you were saying before, like that should be normalized. That is a viable path. And so also, folks could kind of get in their own head and get in their own way of like, oh, well, like, venture capital isn't really flowing these days. Like, is this a bad time to start a company? Am I going to be able to get it funded? But, that's not the only way to build a business.
Yeah, and raising venture capital is not the point of building businesses either. Like, the point is to build something valuable that people pay for and solve a problem. And venture capitalists will find you if you do that. I definitely think we need more examples of people running successful lifestyle businesses that are, actually very successful businesses in all accounts, that are not taking on VC because they don't want to just sell the business and they don't want to IPO. And I do think VCs should start saying to founders, when they see founders running clear lifestyle businesses, I think they should tell them. Right now, the incentives are not aligned, whereas a VC is like, you know what? I don't want to upset people. I don't want to tell them about the business and so on. Or B, who knows? Like, maybe I'll invest in this lifestyle business, and it might be massive later. And I'll just, only one of these businesses needs to be successful. But I don't think it's doing the reputation of VCs any good either. So I would say to VCs, really, if you see something that you don't think can IPO, maybe tell the founder that actually there's another option. There's some really good crowdfunding platforms out there, or you can raise angel and I don't know, maybe try and pay them a dividend. Let's do something crazy like that.
What other advice would you give to VCs?
Oh my God, founders have long memories. Founders like elephants. Just because there's a recession, don't start putting shitty terms in the term sheet. It's not worth it. You're not going to make money that way, and it's not helping the startup ecosystem. So that's one thing. Although I suspect the kind of VCs that are doing that are not going to listen to my advice anyway.
Probably.
Yeah. Other advice species, I don't know. Like maybe like get off Twitter. Don't smell the roses. Life's gonna be okay.
That is good advice for everybody. If you live on Twitter, maybe take a break every now and then.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not real life.